Have you ever stopped to think about why some people collapse from a single moment of pressure, while others remain completely calm in the middle of chaos? Why one harsh comment destroys someone's entire day, while another person absorbs it like stone absorbs rain? 600 years ago, in feudal Japan, there were warriors who trained their minds so intensely that fear itself lost power over them. Not because they were born stronger, not because they felt less pain, but because they learned something modern people have forgotten. The truth is, the problem was never stress. The problem was your relationship with stress. Today, most people wake up and immediately surrender their mind to noise, notifications, social media, comparison, dopamine, endless distraction. People scroll before they even stand up. They consume before they think. And slowly, without realizing it, their nervous system becomes weak. A Stanford neuroscientist once explained that constant dopamine stimulation lowers our tolerance for discomfort and increases emotional reactivity. In simple terms, modern life is training people to become fragile. This is why criticism feels unbearable, why silence feels uncomfortable, why boredom feels painful, why most people cannot sit alone with their own thoughts for more than a few minutes. And you are not alone in this. Millions of people are silently exhausted, overstimulated, emotionally dependent, mentally restless, always reacting, never centered. But here is the paradox. The ancient warriors of Japan lived in conditions far harsher than modern life. Yet many of them possessed a level of calmness most people today will never experience. Why? Because they followed a philosophy built around deliberate hardship, a system designed to forge what the samurai called Fudoshin, the immovable mind, the mind that remains steady even when life becomes violent. Harvard researchers studying resilience discovered something fascinating. The people who perform best under pressure are not the people who avoid stress. They are the people who repeatedly expose themselves to controlled discomfort, exactly what the samurai practiced centuries ago. Cold, silence, discipline, repetition, exposure to fear, again and again and again. Because the truth is, mental strength is not built through motivation. It is built through voluntary discomfort. And after this video, you will never look at your daily habits the same way again. Because I'm going to show you exactly how this ancient Japanese system transformed an ordinary man named Ethan, 29 years old, product designer, smart, ambitious, completely controlled by anxiety, a man who overthought every conversation, who feared criticism, who could not handle pressure, who looked calm on the outside, but was mentally collapsing in silence until one moment broke him completely and forced him to discover the ancient system that changed everything. Welcome to the channel, where we build a community around timeless wisdom, discipline, and the warrior mindset. If you want to master your mind instead of being controlled by it, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and comment below. What is the one thing that destroys your composure the fastest? Fear, rejection, loneliness, criticism. Because the truth is, you cannot conquer what you refuse to face. And in today's video, you will see exactly how the samurai trained themselves to become emotionally untouchable. Chapter 1. The Man Controlled by Everything. In today's video, I'm going to tell you the story of a man named Ethan, 29 years old, product designer, living in a crowded city where everything moved fast, except his mind. His mind was trapped. Every morning started the same way. Phone screen, notifications, emails, social media, bad news, comparison, dopamine before sunlight, before his feet even touched the floor. His nervous system was already under attack. And the worst part? He thought this was normal. Ethan looked successful from the outside. Good salary, modern apartment, smart enough to impress people in meetings. But internally, He was collapsing, silently. Every criticism felt personal. Every delay felt catastrophic. Every difficult conversation replayed in his head for hours, sometimes days. A passive-aggressive message from a coworker could destroy his entire evening. A single sentence from his boss could ruin his sleep. And no matter how much productivity advice he consumed, nothing changed. Because the truth is, the problem was never time management, it was emotional fragility. You are not alone in this. Most people today are mentally overstimulated but emotionally weak. They consume motivation every day, yet panic the moment life becomes uncomfortable. And Ethan was exactly like that. He avoided discomfort everywhere. If a conversation felt difficult, he texted instead of calling. If conflict appeared, he disappeared emotionally. If someone criticized him, he defended himself immediately, not because he was weak, because his nervous system had been trained to escape pressure for years. Then came the moment that shattered him. Monday morning, conference room, 12 people sitting around a table. Ethan had spent 3 weeks preparing a major presentation for an important client. This project mattered. Promotion opportunity, recognition, validation, everything he secretly tied his identity to. Halfway through the presentation, his director interrupted him. Cold voice, no emotion. This doesn't solve the client's actual problem. Silence filled the room. Ethan froze. His throat tightened. His heart started pounding. Suddenly he couldn't think, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe properly. He just stood there, humiliated, while everyone avoided eye contact. That night, Ethan replayed the moment over and over again. In bed, in the shower, while staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., the same scene, again and again and again. What should he have said? Why did he freeze? Why was he like this? But then, something changed. At 3:17 in the morning, unable to sleep, Ethan found an old article about Japanese samurai philosophy. One phrase immediately caught his attention. Fudoshin, the immovable mind, the mind that cannot be shaken by fear, pressure, or chaos. And what Ethan discovered next would completely change the direction of his life. Chapter 2. The Endless Cycle. The next few weeks became hell for Ethan. Not dramatic hell, silent hell, the kind nobody notices. He still showed up to work, still answered emails, still smiled during meetings. But internally, something was breaking. Every morning he woke up exhausted, not physically, mentally. His brain never stopped running. What did people think about him? Did his boss still see him as incompetent? Was everyone secretly judging him after the presentation disaster? The thoughts never ended. And because the thoughts never ended, neither did the anxiety. He started sleeping with his phone beside his pillow, not because he needed it, because he was addicted to distraction. The moment discomfort appeared, he escaped into stimulation. Instagram, YouTube, short videos, news, anything to avoid silence, anything to avoid himself. A Harvard study once found that the average person checks their phone more than 90 times per day. But the real problem isn't the phone. The problem is what people are trying not to feel when they reach for it. And Ethan was constantly reaching. At work, things got worse. He stopped speaking confidently in meetings. He began over-explaining simple ideas, apologizing unnecessarily, second-guessing every decision. The more he feared criticism, the weaker he became under pressure. And people noticed. That's the brutal truth about insecurity. Others can feel it, like blood in the water. One afternoon, his manager asked him a simple question during a team discussion. Ethan knew the answer immediately, but before speaking, he started calculating. What if it sounds stupid? What if they disagree? What if I embarrass myself again? By the time he finally answered, someone else had already spoken. Again, and again, and again. This became his life. Hesitation, avoidance, mental paralysis. At night, he would sit alone in his apartment staring at the ceiling, feeling trapped inside his own mind. He started wondering something terrifying. What if this is just who I am? Weak under pressure, emotionally fragile, controlled by fear. You are not alone in this. Millions of people secretly believe the same thing. They think confidence is genetic. They think mental toughness is something you are born with. But the truth is, most people are not born mentally weak. They are trained into weakness through comfort, through avoidance, through constant escape from discomfort. And Ethan had spent years escaping difficult conversations, escaping uncertainty, escaping silence, escaping failure. Every time life applied pressure, he retreated. Without realizing it, he had conditioned his nervous system to panic under stress. Stanford psychologists call this avoidance reinforcement. The more you escape discomfort, the more dangerous discomfort feels, until eventually, even small challenges feel overwhelming. Then came the moment Ethan realized how bad things had become. Late Friday night, he was sitting alone in his apartment, scrolling endlessly, empty food containers beside him, blue light reflecting across his face. 3 hours gone, then 4. Completely numb. That's when he caught his reflection in the dark window. And for the first time in years, he didn't recognize himself. Not because he looked different, because he looked defeated. And deep down, he knew something had to change, or this cycle would destroy him slowly for the rest of his life. Chapter 3. The Old Book in the Silent Library. 3 days after that night, Ethan stopped going straight home after work, not because he had plans, because he couldn't stand being alone with his thoughts anymore. So he wandered through crowded streets, past glowing advertisements, past people staring into phones like hypnotized machines, everyone moving fast, everyone distracted, everyone exhausted. And yet, nobody seemed fully alive. One rainy evening, Ethan stepped into a small bookstore hidden between 2 old buildings near the edge of the city. No music, no bright lights, just silence. The kind of silence modern people are no longer comfortable with. An old man sat behind the counter reading a worn hardcover book. Gray hair, simple clothes, calm eyes. The man looked up at Ethan for only a second, then said something strange. "You look tired." Not physically, not casually, like he could see straight through him. Ethan forced a small laugh. "Long week." The old man closed his book slowly. "No," he said. "You were exhausted from reacting to everything." Silence. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, because somehow, a complete stranger had described his entire life in one sentence. The old man introduced himself as Kenji, former psychology professor, spent years studying Zen philosophy and samurai history after losing his wife decades earlier. He motioned toward the chair across from him. "Sit." Ethan sat. At first, they barely spoke. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Pages turned quietly somewhere in the back of the store. Then Kenji asked him a question Ethan had never seriously considered before. "When was the last time you experienced discomfort without immediately trying to escape it?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Kenji leaned back calmly. "The moment you feel stress, you reach for your phone. The moment you feel fear, you avoid action. The moment life becomes uncomfortable, you distract yourself." He paused. "That is why your mind has become weak." The words hit Ethan harder than any insult ever had, because deep down, he knew they were true. Kenji walked slowly toward a shelf and pulled out an old black book with faded pages. "This," he said quietly, "was studied by samurai centuries ago. Fudoshin, the immovable mind." Ethan stared at the strange Japanese characters on the cover. Kenji smiled slightly. "Most people think mental strength means becoming emotionless. That is not strength. Real strength is remaining centered while feeling everything. Then he said something Ethan would never forget. The problem was never anxiety. The problem was your addiction to comfort. Silence filled the room again, but this time, the silence felt different, not empty, clear. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't being told to believe in himself. He wasn't hearing motivational cliches. He was hearing something older, something harsher, something real. Kenji opened the book carefully. Inside were teachings practiced by warriors who trained themselves to remain calm under pain, fear, chaos, even death. And as Ethan turned the first page, he realized this was not self-help. This was war against the weakest parts of himself. Chapter 4. Kaizen, the system of small wars. The next night, Ethan returned to the bookstore. Then the next night, and the night after that. Not because Kenji motivated him, because for the first time in years, someone had explained his suffering without pretending it was complicated. Kenji never spoke loudly, never tried to inspire him. He simply observed, like a man watching someone slowly wake up from hypnosis. One evening, Ethan asked the question that had been burning inside him. How do I fix myself? Kenji looked almost disappointed. That is the wrong question. Silence. Then he said quietly, you are trying to transform your life overnight. That is why you keep failing. He walked toward a shelf and pulled down a small wooden box. Inside was a single drop of water falling repeatedly onto stone. Drip, drip, drip. The samurai understood something modern people refuse to accept. Small actions repeated daily become identity. Kaizen, the philosophy of continuous improvement, tiny steps, relentless repetition, no drama, no motivation, no giant transformation overnight, just daily war against weakness. Ethan frowned. That sounds too simple. Kenji smiled slightly. Exactly. People ignore simple systems because they are addicted to intensity. They want motivation instead of structure. The truth is, the problem was never information. It was inconsistency. Those words stayed in Ethan's mind for days, because deep down, he knew he had spent years chasing intensity, new routines, new goals, new productivity systems, and every time motivation disappeared, he collapsed again. Kenji gave Ethan his first practice, simple, almost insulting. Every morning, wake up, sit in silence for 5 minutes, no phone, no music, no stimulation, just silence. That's it? Ethan asked. Kenji nodded. You cannot control your life if you cannot control 5 minutes of silence. The first morning was torture. Ethan reached for his phone 3 separate times. His mind raced constantly. Emails, notifications, memories, anxiety, random thoughts crashing into each other like noise inside a broken machine. 5 minutes felt endless, but he returned the next day, and the next, and the next. Kaizen, tiny repetitions, tiny victories, 1% stronger, again and again. A Stanford behavioral researcher once explained that lasting habit change happens through identity reinforcement, not motivation spikes. The samurai understood this centuries earlier. Repetition rewires the nervous system, not intensity, repetition. By week 2, Ethan noticed something strange. His mornings felt calmer, not dramatically, but enough to notice. The silence no longer terrified him, and for the first time in years, he was beginning to see how weak his attention had become. Modern people call distraction normal. The samurai would have called it slavery, because a distracted mind cannot remain steady under pressure, and a man who cannot control his attention cannot control himself. Then Kenji introduced the second principle: remove comfort. Not all comfort, just unnecessary comfort. Cold water at the end of showers, walking without headphones, Eating without watching videos, sitting without touching the phone, small discomforts, daily, deliberate. Because Kaizen was never about becoming superhuman. It was about rebuilding tolerance for discomfort, one small battle at a time, and slowly. Without realizing it, Ethan was changing. Not through motivation, not through inspiration, but through repetition so small, his old mind almost didn't notice it happening. Chapter 5. The Relapse. For the first time in years, Ethan felt different, not confident, not powerful, but steadier. His mornings were quieter. His thoughts no longer controlled him every second. The small practices were working. Kaizen, tiny repetitions, tiny victories. Every day, Ethan sat in silence. Every day, he ended his shower with cold water. Every day, he forced himself to face small discomforts instead of escaping them. And slowly, his nervous system began changing. At work, he started speaking more clearly, not perfectly, but without apologizing every sentence. He stopped checking his phone every 5 minutes. He started making eye contact during conversations. Even his coworkers noticed. "You seem calmer lately." But this is where most people misunderstand transformation. The beginning feels exciting. The real test comes later, when motivation disappears, when life hits back, and eventually, life always hits back. One Friday night, Ethan came home exhausted after a brutal week at work. His manager criticized his latest project. A client rejected part of his design. 2 deadlines were moved forward unexpectedly. By the time he got home, his mind was screaming for relief. Just one night, one escape, one distraction. So Ethan told himself he deserved a break. He skipped the cold shower, skipped the silence practice, ordered junk food, opened social media, then another video, and another, and another. Hours disappeared. The old patterns returned frighteningly fast. The dopamine, the numbness, the endless scrolling. At 2:13 in the morning, Ethan sat alone in the dark with empty containers beside him and felt something terrifying. Relief. Not from discipline, from escape. And deep down, he knew exactly what was happening. He was slipping backward. Again. The next morning, he ignored Kenji's messages. Then the next day, and the day after that. Within 1 week, his anxiety returned stronger than before. His attention became fragmented again. His emotions became reactive. Small stress felt overwhelming. The old Ethan was coming back. Because the truth is, weakness never disappears completely. It waits, patiently, for you to stop practicing. Finally, Ethan returned to the bookstore feeling ashamed. "I failed," he said quietly. Kenji looked at him calmly. "No," he replied. "You experienced reality." Silence. Then Kenji said something that changed everything. The samurai never trusted motivation. They trusted systems. Ethan frowned. Kenji continued. "Falling down is not failure. Remaining down is failure." That sentence hit Ethan harder than any motivational speech ever could. Because for years, every relapse made him quit entirely. One bad day became a bad week. One mistake became self-destruction. But the samurai philosophy was different. No drama, no self-hatred. Just return to the practice, immediately. That night, Ethan restarted everything. Cold shower, 5 minutes of silence, no phone during meals, tiny actions. Again. Not because he felt motivated, because discipline meant continuing even after failure. And for the first time in his life, Ethan understood something powerful. Mental strength is not built by never falling apart. It is built by returning every single time you do. Chapter 6. The Brain Rewired by Hardship. A month later, something strange started happening to Ethan. The situations around him had not changed. His boss was still demanding. Traffic was still exhausting. Deadlines still existed. But his reactions were changing. A harsh email no longer ruined his entire day. An awkward conversation no longer replayed endlessly in his mind. The pressure was still there, but it no longer controlled him. That's when Kenji explained something the samurai understood centuries before neuroscience could prove it. The brain adapts to whatever you repeatedly experience. Fear, comfort, discomfort, discipline. Your nervous system is always learning. The question is, what are you teaching it every day? Kenji drew 2 small circles on a piece of paper. Amygdala, he said, pointing to the first. The alarm system. The part of the brain responsible for fear and survival. Every time Ethan avoided discomfort, his amygdala learned something dangerous. Discomfort equals threat. This is why small situations felt overwhelming. Criticism felt like danger. Embarrassment felt like death. Silence felt unbearable. Modern people think they are weak because they lack confidence. But often, their nervous system has simply been conditioned to panic. Then Kenji pointed to the second circle. Prefrontal cortex, the decision-making center, the rational mind, the part responsible for discipline, emotional regulation, and long-term thinking. When the amygdala becomes overactive, Kenji explained, the rational mind shuts down. That's exactly what happened during Ethan's presentation disaster. His survival brain hijacked his thinking brain. Fight, flight, freeze. And he froze. A Stanford neuroscientist once described this process as emotional hijacking. Under stress, the brain prioritizes survival over logic. That's why anxious people often know what they should do, but cannot execute under pressure, because fear overrides reason. But the samurai discovered something extraordinary. Repeated exposure to controlled discomfort rewires the brain itself. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize through repetition, cold showers, silence, hard conversations, public discomfort. Each exposure taught Ethan's nervous system a new lesson. This is uncomfortable, but I survived. Again, and again, and again. Over time, the amygdala became less reactive, and the prefrontal cortex became stronger. This is why discipline feels impossible at first, then eventually becomes automatic. The brain adapts to repetition, not intention. That's why motivation is unreliable. Motivation is emotional. Systems are neurological. The samurai understood this long before brain scans existed. They trained under cold waterfalls, sat motionless in silence, repeated painful drills thousands of times, not to look strong, but to recondition fear itself. Kenji looked directly at Ethan. Most people spend their lives obeying every emotion they feel. Fear says stop, so they stop. Discomfort says escape, so they escape. Then he leaned forward slightly. But warriors train the brain to obey discipline instead of emotion. Silence filled the bookstore again. And for the first time, Ethan understood something life-changing. He was not broken. His brain had simply been trained incorrectly for years. And if the mind could be conditioned into weakness, it could also be conditioned into strength. Chapter 7. The man people could no longer control. 3 months into the practice. People started reacting differently to Ethan, not because he became louder, not because he became aggressive, because he stopped reacting emotionally to everything, and that changed the energy around him completely. At work, his manager criticized one of his projects during a meeting. The old Ethan would have panicked immediately, over-explained, defended himself, apologized excessively. But this time, he stayed calm. He listened, took notes, then simply said, "I understand. I'll improve it." Nothing more. No emotional reaction, no collapse. The room became strangely quiet. Because most people expect emotional resistance, and when they don't get it, they lose power over you. That was the first moment Ethan truly understood Fudoshin, the immovable mind. Not a mind without emotion, a mind that refuses to be controlled by emotion. But something else started happening too. Some people became uncomfortable around him. His coworkers still complained constantly about work, relationships, stress, politics, life. But Ethan no longer joined those conversations, not because he thought he was better, because negativity no longer entertained him, and people noticed. "You've changed," one coworker told him. "You used to be more fun." What they really meant was, "You used to participate in emotional chaos with us." This is the hidden cost of discipline nobody talks about. The moment you stop reacting like everyone else, you stop fitting into environments built around weakness. The samurai understood this deeply. A warrior who trains his mind daily cannot fully relate to people addicted to comfort, because comfort changes people. It makes them impulsive, emotionally dependent, mentally fragile. Kenji explained it simply. Most people do not want peace. They want distraction, silence. Then he added, and disciplined people remind them of what they refuse to become. That sentence stayed in Ethan's mind for weeks because he started seeing it everywhere. People said they wanted confidence, but avoided discomfort, said they wanted discipline, but worshipped convenience, said they wanted peace, but fed their minds constant noise. The truth is, most people never build mental strength because they never stay uncomfortable long enough. They escape too quickly. Phone, food, entertainment, excuses, anything to avoid sitting face to face with themselves. But Ethan kept practicing. Cold showers, silence, difficult conversations, daily discomfort, and slowly. His identity changed. He no longer practiced discipline. He became disciplined. And once that shift happens, people can feel it without you saying a single word. Chapter 8. The Storm That Tested Everything. 6 months after meeting Kenji, Ethan faced the hardest moment of his life. His company announced massive layoffs. 30% of the staff would be cut. The office changed overnight. Fear spread through every hallway like poison. People whispered constantly. Co-workers turned against each other. Fake smiles, hidden panic, everyone trying to protect themselves. And Ethan could feel the old version of himself trying to return. The anxiety, the overthinking, the fear of losing everything. For a moment, his chest tightened exactly like before. But this time, something was different. He did not run from the feeling. He observed it, silently, like a warrior watching a storm approach from a distance. The samurai called this mushin, the empty mind, not empty of thought, empty of panic, empty of emotional chaos. That night, while everyone else stayed awake, refreshing emails and imagining worst-case scenarios, Ethan followed his routine. Cold shower, silence, breathing, no phone, no distraction. Because discipline had become automatic, and automatic behavior is what saves you under pressure. That is why the samurai repeated simple practices thousands of times. Under stress, humans do not rise to their ideals. They fall to their conditioning. The next morning, the office felt heavy. People looked terrified. One coworker was almost shaking while speaking. Another kept refreshing Slack every few seconds. But Ethan remained calm, not because he felt no fear, because fear no longer controlled his behavior. That is real mental strength, not emotional numbness, emotional stability under pressure. Then came the announcement. Names were called one by one. Some people cried, some became angry, some immediately blamed the company, the economy, their managers. Reaction, reaction, reaction. But Ethan sat still, breathing slowly, present. When the meeting ended, his manager approached him privately. "You handled this differently than everyone else," she said. Ethan said nothing, because deep down, he finally understood the real purpose of the training. It was never about becoming fearless. It was about becoming steady. Life will always create uncertainty, always create pressure, always create pain. The storm never stops. The samurai knew this centuries ago. That's why they never trained for comfort. They trained for chaos. And at that moment, sitting quietly in a room full of panic. Ethan realized something life-changing. The world cannot easily control a man who has learned to control himself. That is the power of Fudoshin. The immovable mind, not perfect, not emotionless, but unshaken at the core. Conclusion: the price of becoming unbreakable. Most people spend their entire lives waiting to feel motivated, waiting to feel confident, waiting for fear to disappear. But the samurai understood something brutal. Fear never disappears. Discomfort never disappears. Pressure never disappears. The only thing that changes is you. Ethan learned this the hard way. He thought mental strength was about becoming fearless, but it wasn't. It was about becoming stable in the middle of fear. That was the real transformation. Not perfection, not motivation, conditioning, daily conditioning. Because the truth is, the problem was never your lack of potential. The problem was your addiction to comfort. Every time Ethan avoided discomfort, he trained weakness. Every time he faced discomfort, he trained resilience. Again and again and again. That is Kaizen. Small actions, repeated daily, until they become identity. And over time, those small actions completely changed his nervous system. Silence instead of distraction, cold instead of comfort, discipline instead of emotion, response instead of reaction. That is what the samurai called Fudoshin. The immovable mind, not a perfect mind, not an emotionless mind, a mind that refuses to collapse under pressure. And you are not alone in this. Millions of people today secretly feel trapped inside their own minds, overthinking everything, escaping discomfort constantly, drowning in dopamine, reacting emotionally to every little problem life throws at them. But after this video, you should understand something clearly. Mental toughness is not built in comfort. It is forged through deliberate hardship, which means your transformation does not begin when life becomes easier. It begins the moment you stop running. So here is your challenge. Not for someday, not next month. Starting today. The 14-Day Samurai Challenge. For the next 14 days, wake up without touching your phone for the first 10 minutes. Take a cold shower every morning. Sit in silence for 5 minutes daily. Do one thing every day that makes you uncomfortable. One difficult conversation, one moment of discipline, one action that fear tells you to avoid, because every time you move toward discomfort instead of away from it, you reclaim control over your mind. And remember this, you do not fail when you fall back into old habits. You fail when you stop returning to the practice. The samurai never became strong because they were special. They became strong because they trained when they did not feel like training. That is the difference, not talent, not genetics, repetition. So ask yourself honestly, how much of your suffering comes from life itself? And how much comes from your resistance to discomfort? Because the mountain still feels the storm. It simply refuses to move. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and leave a comment below. What is the first uncomfortable action you will take today? And remember, do not wait until life forces you to change. Begin now. Be present. Walk with honor. Follow the path.